Hello everybody, and today we have a big one. This is me ranking every single 2025 game that I played this year, and I managed to get through a whopping 35-ish of them, so we're in for a treat. But before we do that, a couple of notes. First of all, next week we will be ranking every single game I played in 2025, regardless of what year it released, of which there is about 60, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. And secondly, I am only one guy, so even though I managed to play through this many 2025 games, I haven't managed to play everything, so please do keep that in mind. But enough waffling, let's get into things. The worst game I have played this year by a decent distance is definitely FPC Firebreak. I love Remedy as much as the next guy, but this was a huge swing and a miss. The onboarding at launch was a complete disaster, the game tells you absolutely nothing, and just shoves you into its shortest, most boring mission off the bat. There is barely any content in the game, with the aim of the game being to replay the short levels on higher difficulties, which then makes them longer. Now, sometimes cool stuff does happen in some of the levels, but the whole thing as a package just doesn't work, and I still view this game as just a complete disaster. All in Abyss Judge the Fate combines two things I really enjoy: poker and visual novels. Unfortunately, it doesn't do a particularly good job with either. The writing is pretty poor and simple, I quite like the characterisation of the main character, but the dialogue just always leaves a lot to be desired, and each chapter plays out in a very predictable way. The poker aspects feel incredibly scripted, each boss is cheating, so the game consists of trying to figure out how they're cheating and use that against them. You can purchase abilities to use in the game as well. The game just doesn't really do anything well enough to be overly enjoyable. The first of two skateboarding games on the list is the return of the iconic Skate series. I played an unhealthy amount of Skate 3 as a child, so I was quite excited for this, but for lack of a better wording, I just hated this. It is a free-to-play live service skate game, which is just not what I wanted at all. There is no story, it's just completing challenges in an empty, soulless world. The entire tone of the game just feels so off, it's too corporate for a skate game, and the art style is just so uninspired. However, I did find the actual skating itself to be quite fun at times, it's just trapped in an otherwise awful game. I was quite excited for Splitgate 2 as an enjoyer of the original, but boy, this was a complete disaster. From the make FPS great again fiasco, the pointless battle royale mode, and the disgustingly poor progression, Splitgate 2 just seemed like a culmination of really poor decisions. I actually found the core moment-to-moment gameplay quite fun, but after the first few weeks of playing, the game just did nothing to make me want to keep playing. The maps were uninspired visually, the class system didn't fit the game at all, and the progression was a joke. Add some absurdly predatory microtransactions on top, and Splitgate 2 was an all-round mess. I don't seem to be as high on this game as everyone else seems to be, but at the same time I can definitely acknowledge that there is some fun to be had. When the game wants to be a skating game, I think it's awesome, and I also feel like that is kind of the point. It is intentionally leaving you wanting more and feeling unsatisfied. You've got these stages with some interesting visuals and a brilliant soundtrack, the gameplay is smooth enough and pulling off tricks does feel fun, with some interesting boss fights along the way, where you sort of do tricks and then end the trick underneath the boss to deal damage. The issue is kind of everything else. I think it spends too much time on its story, which is not a good story. I get what they were going for, but I don't think it lands, and definitely too much time just walking around. If the game was purely the skating sections, then I think it would be higher, but again, I think that is kind of the point of the game. But hey, I still enjoyed it more than Skate. Putting Atomfall this low down actually feels really harsh, but I just didn't enjoy my time with this game all that much. It's actually heavily inspired by the area I live in the north of England, so I was always going to play the game, but unfortunately the structure is just not my cup of tea. It's far too open-ended for my taste. The game gives you almost no direction, it's just exploring and finding your route through the game however you do so naturally. That's not a flaw on its own per se, it's just not my taste. I also found the combat to be extremely boring and the story a real letdown. The game also just suddenly ends with zero closure at all, and it is one of many 2025 games to actually do this. I could definitely see how others could enjoy Atomfall, I just didn't. Now, many will see this game not being bottom of the list and be angry already, but hear me out, as bad as Mind's Eye was, I actually did have some fun playing the game. Don't get me wrong, the game is bad, but I was actually seemingly the only person to play the game on launch, and have very few bugs or any other technical issues. The combat is extremely simple and lacking basic features such as a melee or throwables. The story I actually found quite interesting at the start, but it does eventually become quite tedious, and is yet another game that just suddenly ends, which as we get further down the list, you'll notice was a very annoying 2025 trend again. Mind's Eye was one of the worst games of 2025, no doubt, I just don't think it was the worst. Black Ops 7 was a huge failure in my eyes. As someone who genuinely enjoyed Black Ops 6, this does feel like a huge step back. The multiplayer is perfectly competent on its own, but I just feel like it's an inferior version of the previous game. The zombies seemed fun enough, but I honestly think I've just aged out of the mode. But the real reason the game is here is the campaign. What the hell was that? I played through the whole thing because I hate myself, and it's just awful. It tried to prey on your Black Ops 2 nostalgia and fails miserably. It pops you in Warzone style maps and tells you to just shoot stuff. It forces tedious boss fights into every mission. It's embarrassing. It is embarrassing that this is what Call of Duty has become. There were moments during my playthrough of Avowed where I saw the vision. Utilising a magic build was quite fun. Some of the areas looked quite nice, but the whole thing just felt so surface level and devoid of a soul. The game feels so restrained in almost every way, and not like the Obsidian that I, and I'm sure many of you, all love. Almost every character in this game is just so boring and forgettable. It has some of the worst companions I've ever seen in an RPG, and whilst the combat was fun at times, it becomes extremely repetitive pretty quickly. This is also another 2025 game that suddenly ends. Being this low on a list does feel a bit harsh on Avowed, but the truth is that I just played so many brilliant games this year, including another Obsidian game much higher up the list. I played a decent chunk of Delta Force this year, but only really to scratch that Battlefield itch before Battlefield 6 released, which, spoiler alert, is higher up on the list. Delta Force was pretty fun, but it also just sort of felt like Battlefield from Wish. It was perfectly competent and filled a gap for me for a month or so, but there's not really too much else to say. On to the next. As someone that has played every single Assassin's Creed game, many multiple times, I think unless the series goes through a serious change in its formula, Shadows may well be my final one. Shadows was definitely fun in moments. Playing as Nawe feels really smooth, slipping through strongholds, assassinating people is always fun, and I feel like this game does get that aspect right. Unfortunately, I hated almost every minute I spent playing as Yasuke. I quite liked his story at times, that was all fine, but his brute force combat style just wasn't what I wanted at all from an Assassin's Creed game. And whilst the world is quite gorgeous at times, the mission design is painfully bland and uninspired after the first couple hours. And this is also yet another 2025 game that just suddenly ends. I am tired. Every game from here on out, I can confidently claim was a game that I enjoyed. We have officially got the stinkers and the kind of average games out of the way. I was looking forward to Keeper for quite a while, and I did enjoy it. However, I don't see it as this incredible piece of media that a lot of other people seem to do. The puzzles are outrageously simple, and I don't think the story did anything special. With that said, it is a visual spectacle, it looks beautiful at times, and the art direction is fantastic, and I do think the gameplay does evolve and become much more interesting in the latter half of the game. I kind of wish they didn't waste the first half of the game with the gimmicks they did. I didn't expect too much from the Precinct, and I was actually left pleasantly surprised. It's essentially just a police simulator where you set out on your shift and you do police stuff. Everything from dishing out parking tickets to chasing robbers to following high-speed pursuits by a helicopter. There is a story going on, but it's not really too memorable, and it is extremely cliché. There are some gangs you're trying to take down, and there is a serial killer on the loose, but it's not as interesting as it sounds like it should be. The driving is also horrendously poor. Still, if you wanted 10 to 15 hours of police work, then the Precinct does give you that. Karma is such a strange game to discuss. Technically, this is a psychological horror game. But in my head, I think of it more as a visual spectacle told in the form of a walking sim. It does have some chase sequences, although they're pretty much just walking forwards. It does have some puzzles, but they are incredibly cookie cutter. The true value for me comes from how the game uses its visuals to explore its themes. It's heavily inspired by 1984 and other dystopian media. It is a really difficult game to recommend though, as it's not very long. I don't think it does anything special from a gameplay standpoint. But it was a very interesting experience, and it's definitely one that I'm glad I played. South of Midnight, whilst not the best game ever made, did make me realise that I miss playing games like South of Midnight. The art style has this stop-motion inspired look that I really loved. The soundtrack really gets the Deep South vibe, and the story I thought was really human with some really interesting characters and some pretty good dialogue. The only place South of Midnight really falls short is in the combat. It is so boring and repetitive, so much so in fact that the game actually gives you the option to turn it off entirely in the options menu. Still, I love the experience. We don't get many games like this anymore. I always hate putting multiplayer games in a list like this because I just never really know where to put them, but I've decided to put Rematch here because whilst I had an absurd amount of issues with the game, and I am very worried for the future of it, I can't ignore the fun that I've had with the game this year. It is an arcade-style football game, and I just found it so fun around release. Unfortunately, the players keep dwindling, following an inconsistent netcode, and big fixes simply taking too long. The majority of the player base spamming exploitable tactics instead of actually playing how the game was intended also doesn't help. Still, I'm glad that I got to have my fun with the game, regardless of where it goes from here. Silent Hill F has a lot going for it, but ultimately fell this far down the list due to its insistence on overusing its worst element. The story is really interesting. You play as Hinako, who goes for a walk through a village before it becomes very clear that something is seriously wrong. The story is really interesting and incredibly tragic, especially in repeat runs, which are absolutely necessary in order to get the full picture, something that does not work in this game. The visuals are also gorgeous at times. Unfortunately, the combat is atrocious. This is normal for horror games, especially Silent Hill games. But the game consistently puts you in unskippable combat gauntlets, and if you want the full story, you have to go through the game multiple times and replay all of these gauntlets. It's just evil. I am a massive fan of the Little Nightmares series, but with the original team not being involved for this one, I was a little bit wary. What we got was pretty much exactly what I expected. A worse version of the games we'd gotten before, but not terrible. Little Nightmares 3 is still a fun game, with some haunting environments and some great chase sequences, and that feeling of being tiny in an enormous world. With that said, it is clear that a little bit of soul has been lost here. It does feel like an imitation of the formula rather than an evolution. The game is also co-op now, which isn't something I really wanted, but I do think it made this particular game a lot better. Placing Lost Records on this list is quite difficult. For the record, this game has a truly abysmal ending. It's sequel baits, it's yet another game of 2025 that just ends, it rushed its character development, it has a terrible ending. It also struggles heavily with its pacing throughout, but with that said, I just loved playing through it. It is a game about friendship, nostalgia, and clinging to our friendship moments, our fondest moments, for as long as we can, as fleeting as they may be. I absolutely view Lost Records as a game of missed potential, but I just enjoyed the vibe, the music, the visuals, it just worked for me. But I do still need to acknowledge that it is a deeply flawed game. Now that I'm going through this list, I actually feel I've been quite harsh on Doom the Dark Ages by putting it sort of this far down, but the truth is I just played a lot of great games this year. Doom the Dark Ages is not as good as Doom Eternal. Not many first-person shooters are, though. The game takes things to a medieval setting, which isn't something that greatly interests me, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is still pretty damn fun. It's heavily based around your shield, as you can use it to zip around the arenas, and it genuinely is really fun. Doom the Dark Ages is great when it wants to be a Doom game. There are the truly awful dragon sections, there are the truly awful mech sections, but when the game remembers where Doom shines best, it shines pretty damn bright. Sword of the Sea is a strange game to recommend because you really need to be into these type of games. There is very little gameplay, the experience is hinged more on the spectacle of the visuals and the movement mechanics. It is a short game, but it was an experience I really enjoyed. It's not going to be for everybody as there's not too much going on, but I just love the visuals and everything else that it was doing. It's a great experience. I'm a sucker for the Mafia series, and they definitely sucked me back in with this one. It's not a perfect Mafia experience, but I did still enjoy it, as it fills that hole for a 10-ish hour linear, narrative-focused game that I always enjoy playing through. The story is a pretty by-the-numbers rise and fall through the Mafia, but the characters you run into along the way are the real heartbeat. Luca is one of the best characters in the series, in my opinion. The Don was brilliant. It was just nice to spend time with these characters. I do think there are issues though. The gameplay is extremely stripped back and simple, which doesn't bother me too much for this game specifically, but I do feel like they could have done a bit more. I also feel that the third act is a bit rushed, but still, I feel it had a lot going for it and I enjoyed it overall. I genuinely think there are only two things that stop Kronos from being an all-timer of a survival horror game. The story doesn't work for me, and I think it's about 5 hours too long. The combat is brilliant, it toes the line between survival and action horror brilliantly. It was the absolute highlight of the experience. The level design is also brilliant. It's true survival horror in this aspect, with you searching for keys and methods of progression whilst picking up some upgrades along the way. The visuals are also quality. it's a truly beautiful game when it wants to be. I sadly just feel like the story isn't told very well. It begins with mystery, but it eventually evolves into a story that feels far too human for the characterization of its cast. I don't think it fits. It also drags a little towards the end. This game didn't need to be 17-18 hours long. Still, it's one of the best horror experiences of the last couple years. I am a Yakuza superfan. I am a massive nerd for this series, and I think that I platinumed this game in 3 days. This is far from a top tier Yakuza experience, but it is a great way to scratch that itch. The story is pretty dumb. Majima gets amnesia and decides to become a pirate. Then there is a conspiracy and whatnot. It's generally nonsense, but it's entertaining. It was awesome being back in Hawaii. I hope this series continues to use this setting in future entries. The combat styles are really fun, the minigames are awesome. The only real drawback is that the pirate stuff itself is actually pretty naff. It's really scaled back and repetitive after you've done it for an hour or two, which for a pirate game is a bit of a letdown. I held no particular affinity towards the first Outer Worlds. I thought it was fine. I generally feel the same way about this one, but I can't deny that it is an improvement. The worlds feel much bigger, the way the game reacts to how you play the game is admirable, and the floor system is an awesome gimmick. Unfortunately, I still feel that the biggest issue with the game is that its characters are all really boring, and I don't think the story does a lot of interesting stuff, but still, I had a lot of fun with this one, and I really enjoyed the RPG elements. Whilst Ark Raiders didn't quite hit as hard for me as it seems to have done for most of the internet, there's still no denying that it is a great game and I have had fun playing it. The extraction shooter loop of looting stuff, killing robots, possibly killing other people, or forcing alliances, then leaving is just a really fun one. It feels tense and rewarding at the very same time, and what really sets this game apart for me is the sense of community. I've been in games where I've helped other people, or other people have helped me, when there was no real reason to do it at all. It's just nice to see that gaming can sometimes bring people together, but also that sometimes the opposite can also be true. I feel a bit weird putting remasters or remakes on these sort of lists, but since this was actually my first time playing through Oblivion, I'm gonna add it. Look, I really enjoyed this game, and I actually feel a bit weird having a game that's this sort of iconic, this sort of area on the list. But I enjoyed the game, and I can definitely tell why it's garnered the reputation it has. The world is an absolute joy to explore. Some of the side quests are simply fantastic. I thought the main quest was a surprising step up from Skyrim as well. It is a must play for fans of RPGs. I just simply played a lot of great games this year that I enjoyed more. I absolutely loved Borderlands 4, but I do need to make something clear. I'm not someone that's going to pour hundreds of hours into the end game, so that's not what I'm ranking here. I'm ranking the actual game. I played through Borderlands 4 as an open world looter shooter and I loved it. The weapons were fun, the gunplay was outstanding, the world was exciting, the writing was actually funny for a change. I simply think if you treat this as a 30-40 hour open world shooter like I did, then you will really enjoy it. I can't comment on all the endgame stuff, I've heard there's a few issues, but that's not really my taste for this kind of thing. I actually think Ghost of Yotei missed a chance to really innovate and develop this series into something special instead of giving us another open world checklist. Unfortunately, it didn't do that, but I still have to admit that as far as open world checklists go, they don't get much better than this. The combat has been improved from Tsushima, with the game now having multiple weapons instead of stances that work best against certain weapons the enemy could have. The world is of course gorgeous, if a little tedious to explore, everything due to its structure. The story is extremely predictable, but I do think it was interesting enough with some cool characters. It's just a shame it's a story, and a game really, that we've seen dozens of times before. Now, you're probably going to see this game this high up the list and be confused, but all I will say is, hear me out. Promise Mascot Agency is genuinely some of the most fun I've had with a game all year. You play as an ex-Yakuza forced to work at a mascot agency where you send these weird looking guys on jobs to earn money. The main character is also voiced by the guy that voices Kiryu in the Yakuza series, so there you go, you should be sold. The game is essentially capitalist simulator where you're trying to maximise your profits to pay off a debt, but you also learn of a conspiracy in this small town and attempt to get to the bottom of it. The gameplay is essentially just driving around and finding upgrades to your business, but there's also this deck builder element which is really fun in bursts as well. The story is actually better than I expected, even if it is often ridiculous. I genuinely can't quite put into words why I love this game so much, but it is just 15 hours of pure unadulterated fun. Battlefield 6 kinda dominated my life for a good few weeks. Battlefield is unquestionably back, the campaign was a major disappointment, and they're doing some funky stuff with the portal I don't agree with, and there is some pretty bad progression. But the core multiplayer, moment to moment, playing the game, is brilliant. Playing each role really feels like it matters in the outcome of the overall fight, yet there's still that feeling that you're an insignificant cog in a giant machine of war. It is so cinematic with brilliant visuals, incredible sound design, and amazing gunplay. I swore I wouldn't become addicted to Ball X Pit, and I unfortunately lied. This game is utterly incredible from top to bottom. It is a roguelite where you send your little guys into the pit and shoot balls at enemies to try and reach the end and beat the final boss. Then you use your materials to harvest and upgrade your base. It is a wonderfully satisfying loop that never really stops being fun. There's also loads of different characters that completely reshape how the game plays, such as making it turn-based or having a character that chooses the upgrades for you. The variety is off the charts, and so is the fun factor. One of my surprise packages of 2025 has definitely been the alters. The core concept alone is already doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's basically what if your crew on an alien planet was made entirely of alternate versions of yourself. That is such a clever premise. You're stuck here and you're all by yourself, so you decide to clone yourself, but what happens is you end up creating different versions of you that made different choices in life, leading to them having different professions and skill sets. The real magic is in the balance between efficiency and humanity. It is a survival game, but it's also a people game. You have to sort of make sure that you're not just working everyone to the bone, because otherwise they will get annoyed, they could mutiny, they can kill you if you piss them off too much. It's really good at doing that sort of thing. Exploration is also pretty fun, I thought. The survival mechanics are pretty smartly tuned. I really cannot stress enough how brilliant the Alters is, and for the life of me I cannot remember the main actor's name. Alex Jordan, bang! But he was incredible in this, and possibly should have been nominated for Best Performance at the Game Awards. I think Death Stranding 2 is a better game than the first, simply due to the fact that it's easy to play as a result of your struggle and experience with the first. The first game made you suffer before it let you enjoy the traversal tools, but here, within the first few hours, you have all of the conveniences that you had in endgame Death Stranding. That said, while the gameplay feels more refined and better paced than the first, I did find the story to be a lot weaker. The emotional core just isn't quite as strong for me, and some of the new characters feel more like ideas than actual people. I don't feel that the story was as focused this time. But again, this is Kojima, so even when it stumbles in style. The weirdness is off the charts in the best way. The man knows how to build a moment, we can just say that. Also, do not play this game without playing the first one. I don't even mean for story reasons, but just so much of your appreciation for Death Stranding 2 will come from what you experienced in the first game in a way that a story recap simply won't be able to emulate. If we're talking pure co-op experiences, like actual design for two people, then they do not get better than Split Fiction. And I know that's a big claim. I know some people will say It Takes Two was better, or even stuff like Portal 2, but hey, I think there might be a bit of nostalgic gleam there, to be honest. Split Fiction is absolute peak. The level design is next level. Every single area feels handcrafted to make sure both players are doing something meaningful, not just helping out each other, but relying on each other in smart and inventive ways. The way that it introduces mechanics, lets you get used to them and then subverts them and gives the mechanic a new meaning is just a masterclass in design. The story unfortunately sucks. It features two writers getting trapped in their stories. I think they could have done a lot more with what is honestly a really intriguing and relevant concept in today's world with AI and whatnot. And really, the only thing keeping this from being unanimously crowned the GOAT of co-op is nostalgia in my opinion. But hey, that's my hot take. I was incredibly excited for Dispatch, but even I didn't expect it to be this high on my Game of the Year list. The way this game plays with your emotions is simply not fair. It makes you care so deeply about all of its cast, and the incredible animation and top tier voice work from the likes of Aaron Paul and Laura Bailey and everyone else do a lot of heavy lifting. It also boasts an incredible soundtrack that always managed to match the vibe of the scene and allow the most important moments to stick in my mind, possibly forever. The art style as well, just wow, look at the animation, Jesus. It also helps that it just tells one of my favourite video game stories of all time. It simply is that good. I even liked the gameplay, which definitely feels like a matter of personal taste, but still, Dispatch is unbelievable, and I think my first video of 2026 is actually going to be on it. If you were annoyed at me for putting Oblivion on here, then I can't imagine how you're feeling right now, because in number 2 position for 2025 games, we have Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, look, much like Oblivion, this was actually my first time playing through this game, and it's just awesome. The stealth gameplay is outrageously fun. I found the characters so interesting. The level design is a delight. The story, heart-wrenching. The game is simply just peak. I had an absolute blast playing through it. I had to put it this high. I'm really sorry that I've annoyed you, and I think this also makes it pretty clear that there's quite a few really big 2025 games that I didn't get around to playing, but don't worry, I played the big one. Let me be completely clear. Clair Obscur isn't just the best game I've played that released in the last year. It is the best game I've played that's released in the last few years. Games this good do not come along often, and when they do, you have to make sure you play them. Don't be one of those people that thinks, oh, I preferred this game, so that means Clair Obscur must suck. No, two things can be true. You can love a game and also think another game is really good. Clair Obscur is unquestionably fantastic. Everything about it just clicks. The story is borderline perfect to me. I think it's daring, it takes risks, both structurally and emotionally, but unlike so many others, Clair Obscur actually follows through. I can see how the sort of twist towards the end of the game could rub people the wrong way, but I don't think it is sort of a cop-out. I think it is actually done really, really well. There is a confidence in the writing that is so rare. It knows exactly what it wants to say, and it says it with precision, beauty, and weight. And then there is the combat, turn-based at its core, but with real-time inputs and reactive mechanics woven in. Every turn, every ability feels tactile. You're timing blocks, you're aiming shots, you're managing momentum. It's strategic, and it never gets old. This is the blueprint to me for how modernized turn-based RPGs should work. Visually, the game is stunning, the world design is rich and imaginative but not bloated, it's dense with meaning, not just noise, and the soundtrack is utterly ridiculous. There isn't really a caveat here, there isn't an, but if you're not into this genre, I think that if you're not into turn-based games, I still think you can enjoy this game. The game, to me, is just fantastic. If you haven't played it yet, I don't know what you're doing if you're not playing it out of spite or if you don't think it's for you. Either way, you're wrong. It is Game of the Year to me, absolutely no question. So that is my Game of the Year list for 2025. I do apologise for not playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Hollow Knight Silksong. Maybe I will at some point, but alas, we are now done here. What are your favourite games of 2025? Please do let me know, as I am genuinely curious. Remember, next week we will be ranking every single game I played in 2025, regardless of release date, and I played around 60 games, so you definitely do not want to miss that. So make sure you subscribe so you know when it's up. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like, as it really does help me out. And for now, that is all. Have a nice day, and goodbye.